Hello everyone, welcome to our Twitter space. Glad glad that you're joining us today. So I'm just gonna add Sage now as a speaker. Hi Sage, how you doing? Good to have you here.
Hello. Hey everyone. I'm excited. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me, Lazar and Esther.
thanks for joining. I'm excited for today's space and I'm hoping that we'll have a really nice conversation. My name is Esther. I work as a developer relations engineer at Buildable. I also contribute to open source. I contribute specifically to Chakra UI. And yeah, I think that's where I met Laza. So, Laza, you can go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Esther. So I'm Lazo Nikolov. I'm also part of the Chakra UI project, and I'm working as a DevRel at Sentry. So next up is Mr. Sage.
Hello everyone. My name is Shegun Adebayo, even though most people call me Sage. I wish I could say I'm working as a DevRel at Chakra UI, maybe. I'm the creator of Chakra UI and Zack JS. I'm really excited to be here to share my knowledge from my experience maintaining the projects. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Sage. Thanks for joining and honoring honoring our invite. So I know you've accomplished so much and like the open source space and generally, and you've also created like two open source projects, Chakra UI, Zack JS, which by the way they're amazing, right? But I want to hear more about your backstory. I probably know already your backstory, but a lot of people on this space do not know your backstory. So I'd love you to tell us more about yourself and how you started your tech journey. What made you, even start Chakra UI as an open source library in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So my journey, I guess, depending on how far back you want me to go, but maybe I'll just go back to my background, how I started, how I got into the tech field in the first place. So I started off as a graphic designer back in the days of Photoshop. Basically designing logos. I think that should be roughly like 7 years ago right now. I was designing logos and flyers and business cards and all the likes, all the variations of that, and creating mockups. And then very shortly, I transitioned into WordPress. I'm sure everyone maybe has a taste of WordPress at some point in their career, but I dabbled into WordPress thinking I could learn, try to build a website, but it was actually way too complex for me to figure out at the time because you have to learn jQuery, this thing called JavaScript, HTML, and I'm like, I just want to stick with Photoshop for now, please. So I kind of left. I left that field, dropped WordPress, and then just went back to design. And shortly after that, I stumbled on Adobe Illustrator, basically trying to, design websites with Adobe Illustrator, design logos, and then I think like shortly after that, I think I really started to enjoy design. And back in school, in university, I studied in University of Lagos, Nigeria, mechanical engineering. So like I had lots of gigs from friends that maybe would pay you 500 naira or 1,000 naira. Just take this money, I beg, help me make a website or help me make a logo. And I think I did way too much of that. I got interested in design, and I'm grateful for that experience today because I think few months after that I picked an interest in designing websites mostly. So I dropped all the logo gigs, all the 500 naira or 1K gigs. Let's just actually get a bit more serious with design. And I think in that process, I started freelancing on platforms like Fiverr and Upwork at the time. I think I worked with quite a lot of clients, different, diverse clients from all over the world. So that actually gave me enough exposure into the tech scene and into design in general. Nothing too serious, to be honest. I wish I could say my story. I wish I could say that like I was really inspired and I had all these things figured out that I wanted to do open source. But I think that the journey to open source started with like working with a couple of clients. So I moved all over from freelancing on Upwork to freelancing on this platform called TopTal. And while I was on TopTal, I think the platform was quite a bit more serious than Upwork and Fiverr because they were a bit more like specialized clients. And I was working with two different teams that needed to design websites and mobile apps. One of the things I quickly realized is if I made a design in Figma, let's say I make a homepage design in Figma in 2 days. It probably would take my fellow developer that I was working with maybe 4 days or 1 week to convert that design to code. And I noticed that that became a pattern. It's not exactly a thing where they intend, it's not like they plan to be that slow, but I think as a result of the tools that they use, at the time, I think it was Bootstrap and like Material CSS or Material UI at the time, so it felt like they were literally fighting against the tool. So I had to be very careful with the design that I sent to them. And they'll be like, hey, Sage, please be careful because this one will take us 2 weeks. Try to create one that's a little bit simpler for us. And that really got to me because it felt like I wasn't doing my job to the best of my abilities because my fellow developer friends, could not actually convert the design to code. So I picked interest in trying to solve that problem. And maybe 5 years ago, and then now today is basically a whole different story because I kind of like just learned in that journey to be able to I got all the skills I needed to actually solve the problem, which is now Chakra UI. Chakra UI is just one of my ideas to help bridge the gap between design and code, but there are many more coming, I'd say.
Okay, thank you so much. That's a very interesting journey. It's interesting to also know that you did a bit of freelancing on the side as well, and even graphic design, UI design, and all of that. So I share similar, well, I say career path into tech, so it's definitely interesting. So I want us to take a step back now and talk a bit about open source. I would like you to maybe tell us about how would you describe open source to someone that has no idea about open source? So let's just define open source and explain in concepts, very simple concepts, what open source is and what it entails. Yeah, just talk about it briefly.
Yeah, I think open source is an interesting word. Basically, it's open. The full word is open source software. But these days we tend to cut off the software part and just like stick with open source, which basically means you have. Let's start with the source. Basically, source just means that you have something to share. I mean, it could be code. It could these days it could be resources. It could be tutorials. And open basically means it's open to everyone. Anyone from anywhere can actually see it and use it. And depending on the licensing model, they can decide to attribute you to the work or just use it without attributing you anyways. So the main concept behind this is you see a problem and you sort of have a solution to that. The problem could be that people are struggling to learn this thing called JavaScript or React, and you have a solution, which means you have a step-by-step process of people actually learning JavaScript or React. And then you go to a place called GitHub, basically putting all your it could be on GitHub or any other like Git based platforms. Put all the different ideas and steps in there and make it public to everyone and let everyone actually see and share and help you maintain that. So it could be a knowledge base, it could be a code base, and these days it could just be a resource base, which means it's just a list of resources. So that just means that open source doesn't always have to be code, even though I think I'm here today because I've heard a lot of you don't have to write so much code to do open source, which is completely true. But there are also other areas aside from maybe things like docs. Contributing to documentation is also like what is called what we can consider open source. But on a very simple note, is basically any piece of resource that is open for other people to learn from or for other people to use.
Okay, cool. I love your definition. You talked about GitHub, and I was going through one of your recent projects, like one of your recent interviews with GitHub, and you mentioned that open source is very important to have a community around open source projects so that it's not like the maintainer that is always maintaining it. So I want you to just talk us through how a community is important for open source projects.
Yeah, I think one thing is probably one thing we should talk about before that basically is the nature of open source maintenance itself. So when you have a resource and you share it and you make that open source, let's say you have a code that does a specific thing for React or Vue, and you make that open source, by default you would assume that it means that like it's open for everyone to maintain, that it's open for modification. People can create pull requests. But a pull request is basically a request to change that piece of resource that you have. So if someone sees a gap or a glitch in there and they want to help you fix it, but then, even though it's open for everyone to contribute, there's a high burden it actually places on the maintainer or the creator of that resource, because people expect you to be there, well, be there till forever to actually fix it or to make it better. But I think that is the hidden contract of making something open. There's the hidden cost of like maintaining that thing. So it's best before getting into open source to actually know how long you want to maintain the thing for. But if you don't actually find an answer to that, you may just end up in a loop of constantly having to maintain that thing, make it better, fix issues, fix bugs, and make it resourceful for other people. So the side effect of that is as a maintainer, because you've been maintaining this thing for a long time, it takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on your mental health, physical health. People just come and just like request for things, as though maybe like you know the problems they are going through and you just want to magically make something for them. So over time, it starts to feel like what you enjoyed making because it was like fun for you. It was so nice. You thought about the solution, it was awesome, and then you launched it, and then a year later, you basically just start to lose interest because people are starting to ask for things that you maybe like you feel like should not be in your project. But then pushing back too often also like has that effect it has on you, and even the people that use your project as well. So uh, what you want to be careful about in general is just to make sure that you don't lose interest or passion for the project you start. When you make that open source, but when that starts to hit, there's also a thing for asking for help, right? Which is why a community is important. A community basically is just a group of people that use your product and are excited about your product enough to share it on Twitter, on Discord, basically everywhere, to spread the word about it and to help other people learn and use your product. It's a gift if you're able to build a community around your product, because it just helps you self-sustain the project by default.
Yeah, thanks. I definitely agree with you because even as a contributor to Chakra UI, I know that some people could just send you messages on Discord, send you messages everywhere, and they feel like you should just, answer their questions or give them solutions to whatever problems that they are facing. And it can be a whole lot. And this is me as a contributor, and I know that you actively maintain Chakra UI and Zack JS. I know you've talked a bit on it, but I want you to like break it down. How do you, or how would you describe what you do as a maintainer, and how, let's say, does it differ from what a contributor does? What's your day-to-day life like as a maintainer of open source projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. You probably mentioned a couple of terminologies that we probably need to explain to the audience. So you have a project, an open source project. You are the creator of that project, and because you are the creator, you are also the maintainer of that project. And then there's another set of people called the contributors or collaborators, which are people that take interest in the project over time and are like willing enough to help you improve that project that you've created. the difference between the creator or the maintainer and the contributor, basically the maintainers are those that actually drive the core projects forward. They definitely are responsible for everything in the project. And in an open source project, there is the maintenance, making sure you actually ship new versions of the project, making sure you fix bugs in the project, making sure you write good documentation for new features, and also bug fixes in the project. There's also speaking about the project, basically doing DevRel work for the project, which means attending events, speaking at conferences, speaking at Twitter Spaces like this. There are so many arms to being a maintainer, but being a contributor basically means there is this small piece of thing I want to contribute to, and I put in my contribution for it, and I'm out. I don't have any commitment to the project. I just saw something small and I want to fix it. So that makes the scope a whole lot smaller. So it's more like a contributor is basically maybe like 2 to 5% of the entire work. But I think the maintainers definitely bear most of the burden of maintaining, not just creating it, maintaining it, and not just maintaining it, building a community around it. And it doesn't even end there. Writing documentation and adding new features to the project, which is definitely quite a lot of work, but that's what the job entails.
Okay, nice. Thanks to everyone for joining in. If you're just coming, we've been talking about open source, and Shegna has been sharing his experience on maintaining Chakra UI and Zack JS. It's been an interesting conversation so far, but if you have any questions, feel free to request for the mic or drop your questions in the comment icon on the bottom right corner of your screen. So I'll just pass it to Laza. I think Laza has a couple of questions. I'm just going to pass it to him now. Laza?
Yeah, thanks, Esther. So, Sage, I'm like interested. What are like the main difficulties you face maintaining Chakra UI as like the first project, but then also like how maintaining Chakra UI differs from maintaining Zack JS? That is my question.
Those are like two hot questions in one. Yeah, I think that like I mean there's quite a lot of challenges to be honest in open source. But I think that I'll start with challenges of just maintaining Chakra UI. The biggest one is there is no vacation in open source, which which is a little bit you'd expect that you should be able to draw boundaries between like your own like personal life and like maintaining open source and the work you do, and even if you have a full-time job, in some cases if your project gets to the point where it's being used by a lot of people, there's the implicit there's an implicit expectation that you actually get to like improve it and maintain it, for it to actually stay the same over the years or for it to last long. So my constant struggle most of the time is staying relevant, which is one. Knowing that there's always someone in the corner somewhere, in some foreign place trying to make something way better than what you have as a project. Not to say that it's a competition, but it's more like you just wanting to stay relevant in the ecosystem and in the industry at large. That is one of the key pieces with open source projects. And then I think that the other struggle I find myself getting into is basically the I call it the push and the pull, which is people asking for more, even though you don't think you should do more, because sometimes more is nice for other people, but more just means more maintenance, more means more documentation, more means more issues, and just trying to figure out what is just the bare enough minimum that people can actually live with your project and be happy with, right? So I think like open source is more like also a business. The only sad difference is that it's for free, except maybe you get sponsors, people that actually donate money to help you keep that going, which is also a struggle I'll talk about. But in the end, it's more like making sure you have just enough that you can carry, and you don't want to overburden yourself. while maintaining open source, because anyone that does open source is a generous person by default. And I always appreciate like any such person that I find, because open source is just an act of kindness, helping other people solve problems that they have in their life or in their business most of the time. So um, yeah, that's the struggle. And then the third one, which is the biggest one, is sustaining the project. I mentioned earlier that open source is like business. Um, One of the key things that I see is people that volunteer to be contributors or collaborators, people who do that consistently, like Laza and Esther, for example. They show a lot of interest and they contribute heavily to the project. The thing that bothers me the most is if people that actually are that consistent will be able to keep up with the demands of the project. Right? So what I've seen in my own experience is, someone shows consistent contributions. You say, okay, hey, would you love to be a maintainer of this project? And they say, yeah, sure, that sounds exciting to me. And then they become a maintainer. And then when they get into the full core of the work itself, and then they see that like the work is not just about docs, the work is about issues, it's about pull requests, it's about documentation, it's about public, going out there and spreading the word about the project, it's about writing articles. And they'll be like, oh my god, this is way too much than I bargained for. And they basically just like go back to the shell of like, this is way too much for me. Maybe 6 months down the line, it'll be like, I just want to take a break from this project. And then you have to go through that same cycle with different set of contributors. So just getting people that are always fresh from time to time is also a challenge. And this is a no-brainer for me because I cannot afford to maintain Chakra UI by myself. There's always help. People are always willing to help in the community. So spending that time with different people, I mean, it's also like a challenge, because it's a cycle. For me, it's more like it's 4 to 6 month cycle of having to train or like help new interested contributors and help them become maintainers. So that cycle continues. So that's also a concern for me.
Sweet. So, like, circling back to the second thing that you mentioned, like, build something new, right? It means good for the people that are requesting it, but it just means more maintenance to the team, right? And
Yeah.
I remember back in the day, I was like, hey, we should build a framer package for Chakra UI. Now I understand that now what it means, like, developing a new package alongside the ecosystem. But hey, after Adobe bought Figma, maybe we will make that framer package. Who knows? So yeah, thank you for the answer. I've got another question.
Sure.
Do you have like suggestions on efficiently handling GitHub issues, comments, pull requests, etc.?
Yeah. So for those that are not like, for those that are not to like GitHub, I mean GitHub savvy, I mean issues are basically people that flag like, I mean, something that's not working or something that is incorrect in your project, right? So they say there's a bug here or there's a typo here, please fix it. Um, there's definitely, I think that there's a thing called triage, which means going through issues and trying to qualify or categorize them. So people that open typos, for example, you could group them with a tag called documentation or typo. People that open issues that relate to bugs, you could group that with bugs. Actually add more specific context to that. That is the art of just triaging the issue. I think this is actually very like, I mean, very very underrated, in most cases. And like being able to group issues, I mean, helps the people that are maintaining that project to be able to find what they are interested in from time to time. Because I'm not always interested in like technical bugs. Sometimes I just want to like get through the typos because they are so easy to sort of understand and figure out. But then when it gets to like the technical code, I think, with those kind of issues, being able to reproduce them, because someone just says that I tried it with my Android phone, and I open the WebKit browser and it's not longer working, this thing that you made. But it's actually hard to understand that without being able to reproduce that, by yourself. And for me, maintaining Chakra UI is definitely like an interesting one because Chakra UI is a UI framework, and that makes it a little bit hard because someone says, I open this with the Badu browser. I'm like, how am I supposed to get the Badu browser to test this? And that makes it even hard to, even hard to sort of like figure out the solution to the problem. So that's where like learning about tools and like platforms that actually provide you all the things you need to be able to debug issues effectively comes into play. So yeah, I would say triaging, which means grouping and categorizing issues, is important. And I also say like finding ways for technical issues, finding ways to actually reproduce them. I know right now there's GitHub code spaces, which helps you like easily execute like code. In a cloud environment to just verify the issue. And there's also Code Sandbox. So Code Sandbox helps us at Jackrabbit UI to easily verify that something is a bug. And I think the third one I would add to that is there's a difference between a bug and a feature request. But these days, people sometimes get very sneaky to basically make a feature request look like a bug. But sometimes it makes sense to actually uh, put a fine line between those two. What you're asking for is something new. It's not something that existed before. So please let's put this one aside for now. And let's get a bit more upvotes before we even dedicate some time to those.
Sweet, thanks. So yeah, basically, there's the open source etiquette that, for example, every potential contributor should follow, right? And we kind of, I don't want to say enforce it, but like guide the potential contributors by doing, creating the contributors MD file and the small little headers in the issue templates, etc. Plus, as you mentioned, we also could use automations like for issues and bots and everything. And yeah, that's cool. And what about the releases, right? So we have new features. We want to do a release. Do you schedule those releases, or is like do you follow any cadence uh, for the releases of new versions of either Chakra or Zag or any of the projects?
Yeah, I would say that they actually like tools. There are many tools that can help you automate this process. But a release basically is very tied to a change log. What that means is I fixed a new bug or I've added a new feature to my project Chakra UI, for example. Now I want to make that available to other people. Right. So the way we do that at the moment in Chakra UI is we have some sort of automation in place where anytime anyone fixes a bug or adds a new feature, they're basically forced to document that feature or document that bug. So we use a tool called ChainSets, which is an open source tool as well. It has a GitHub bot. So anytime you actually open a pull request to a project, it's basically stays in your face to say, hey, you haven't documented this change. Click a button to do that, or run a CLI command to do that. And when you do that, and we merge that change in, it basically automates the process of creating a change log and creating a release pull request. So what happens then is we can merge as many pull requests as we want, and this release pull request is automatically updated. Whenever we're ready to do a release, we basically merge that release pull request, and that gets distributed to npm, which is where like most JavaScript libraries live. So the moment that gets released, everyone gets to consume that. And then the post process after that is now you've published a new version of your library. How do you let other people know that there's a new version available? So we have two processes there in place. One of them is to update the docs. So the docs actually reflect that there's a new version. And the other one is to create an automated post to Discord, um, uh, which actually then posts like an announcement post to say, "Hey, there's a new version," and that helps other people stay informed. Because sometimes I've seen prior to actually setting up this process, I've seen scenarios where people open issues that like have already been fixed in a previous release, and they just did not know there was a release, or they did not set up GitHub notifications for that project. So putting up all these post-release processes also helps.
Nice, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Like, feel free to raise your hand or request to speak. I'm giving out microphones, guys.
All right, cool. Thanks, Laza. So I have a couple of questions for Sage. In terms of contributors, I know earlier you mentioned that contributors have like a limited lifespan, and even me as a contributor on Chakra UI, I know someone may be contributing for a month so regularly, and after a while, the person may not just contribute, and that's totally fine. But I'm curious, like, do you have any tips on how a maintainer can retain contributors long term for open source projects?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I wish I had all the answers to that, but I think that what actually helps is basically to, I call it just giving up control of the project, and this has a lot. This depends heavily on the personality of the person who actually created the project. If you're the kind of person that always loves to be in control, like every single time, you'd end up being stressed and overwhelmed in open source, which is why it just makes sense to ask for help and get other people to support you. So what I've seen is you want people that actually are contributing to your project to feel that they belong there, and you want them to actually feel like it's their project as well. So you have to start to give up control of that open source project. You just slowly start to guide the direction of the project and just like be there to help and support people. You basically just become a support service for the maintainers, and just like guiding them and help and unblocking them from time to time. So it's pretty much the same as going from an independent contributor to being a manager in a company. So that transition is very similar to a maintainer and working with collaborators in the end. It's basically just like shifting focus from coding every day or writing docs every day to actually just guiding people and onboarding people most of the time, pretty much.
Okay, cool. I like what you said about giving up control, and it's very important, right? And even onboarding maybe contributors properly so they feel like they're part of the project and they don't just feel like, yeah, maybe using them or stuff like that. So that's really interesting. So now I want us to talk more about Zack JS. I know we've spoken about Chakra UI. So I saw you working on Zack JS, right? But I would really love to know what prompted you to create Zack JS. I know it's a really unique, project, open source project. So what prompted you and process for, what was the process like for you rather when creating Zack JS?
Yeah, I think the process is almost the same for me when creating any project. It's very similar to how I created Chakra UI, but the reason why the other library Zack.js is a bit more like dear to me, is mostly because it came out of the frustration of maintaining Chakra UI. And what I mean by the frustration there is, again, it's part of the request that I talked about earlier. We released a UI component library that is primarily for React, right? And today we see that there's quite a lot of more frameworks that are actually very promising, and most likely would stay relevant in the next 5 to 10 years, at least in the ecosystem. And then we get requests like, how about can we have Chakra UI in Svelte, or can we have Chakra UI in Solid.js? And then it's more like, in my mind, the way I interpret such requests, even though the person says it's so cool if we can have Chakra UI in this framework, uh, the way I interpret that in my head is, dude, imagine if you're doing the same work in two places, or in three places, or in four places. I cannot even imagine that. That would basically mean I don't have a life for myself anymore, and I just stay on my laptop every single day, just typing code and pushing out code, and I cannot even imagine myself doing that. So what I did instead is to take a step back to, I mean, just ask myself like, I don't have to do. Basically don't have to multiply my efforts. But yeah, I wish there was a way I could basically solve that problem only once, and make sure that like any new JavaScript framework that comes out there doesn't actually increase my work in the end. Right. So Zack JS was basically born out of a research to figure out like how can I take all the lessons I've learned in Chakra UI and just do it once, and never have to maintain multiple frameworks anymore, and basically still have support for all the frameworks, all the JavaScript frameworks, if possible. Right. So and then I stopped. I mean, I took a break for 2 weeks, I think, to actually do research on this topic, and then I stumbled on the concept called state machines. And a bit more research, a lot of watching front end masters, to be honest, just to understand what this concept means and what it looks like. And then I think that it basically clicked for me, and I started doing a couple of experiments, and then it basically just like I think this can actually work. And Zack.js is basically a testament to that process.
Yeah, that's another interesting story. On an average, which one took you longer to create? Is it Zack JS or Chakra UI?
Yeah, Chakra UI definitely took me longer. I think I spent 8 months working on Chakra UI, mostly because I came from a place where I had zero knowledge about like JavaScript frameworks, Next.js, TypeScript, server-side rendering, and all the many shenanigans of the JavaScript ecosystem. I largely came from a design background, and I had to do all that learning myself. And thanks to all the resources out there in the community, but that took me, I think, quite a long time to figure out. And there was lots of banging my head against the wall because I couldn't figure out some use effects and stuff in React. But I'm glad I'm in a much better place now compared to like 4 years ago when this all started. But Zack.js maybe took me 3 months, mostly because like I already knew most of the things from maintaining Chakra UI, and it was mostly about like transferring my knowledge from one approach to the other.
Nice. You make it sound so easy, like 3 months for a state machines project, right? So we are gradually nearing the end of this space, and it has been really insightful. But I want to ask, what would you say to people who are new to open source and are looking to contribute, that is contributors? What's the biggest thing they should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think like I'd like to maybe redirect the question a bit to most of I mean this one is particularly like dear to me, but I'll just say it anyways. With most of my friends, specifically from Africa, I think that like when I look at the open source space, there's a lot of things that I see that makes me feel like we are more like there's the general notion that we basically just consume we basically consume libraries, and we're never like creators or initiators of solutions. So one of the first things I would say is it don't even have to be from Africa. Basically, anywhere in the world that you are, if you feel like open source is not for you, or you don't feel confident in yourself or in your abilities to make open source solutions, I'll basically challenge you to think twice, because here is me. I'm probably like a living testament to that. That you can actually like get yourself together and try to make something out there that solves problems for other people. It feels like sometimes it feels like you're doing free work, and it almost makes you feel like, dude, you're not a Father Christmas. Like, why would you just give your time away for free? But there's a lot of benefits you get from getting into open source. Besides the experience of like actually, one of the things I would say in open source is if you maintain a project that's open source, and you do that for let's say 1 to 2 years, the amount of knowledge you get is basically equivalent to spending maybe 5 to 8 years in a company. And I mean that specifically because the knowledge that I've gotten from maintaining Chakra UI over the past 3 years is enormous. And sometimes I just marvel and like, how did I even know this thing? Largely because like someone opened an issue somewhere or someone opened a pull request somewhere that actually gave me a bit more context. And every PR basically is an opportunity to learn a new approach. And imagine a project that has a lot of PRs. You basically learn from like 1,000 or 2,000 people at the same time. Right. So this is kind of the mindset that I have when it comes to like working open source. And you basically should never undermine yourself, regardless of where you're from. In my mind, whatever you make, as long as it's substantial and it solves a problem for people out there, there are people that would use it. There are people that would help you move this thing forward.
Yeah.
Dude, I love that. I've got a few questions though. Do you mind if I have like a few more of your minutes?
Yeah, there are other people on this space as well, but let's just take one more.
Yeah. Yeah, please. Anyone who is interested to like ask a question, or it doesn't have to be a question. You want to tell your side of open source, feel free to request to speak. All right, in the meantime, I want to ask you like as the maintainer, how do you drive the adoption of your projects in the community?
Yeah, I think it starts with like a very thoughtful documentation of what you have done. So the reason I say that is mostly because like there is a high chance that when you're building in itself, you're basically just blind to the very tiny details of like everything you had to do to make the library come together. And it takes a bit of more thought and a lot of effort to actually show the value of what you have made to other people. And one of the easiest way to actually demonstrate that value is through thoughtful documentation of the work itself. I always tell myself if it takes you 3 months to build a library, there's a high chance it will take you another 3 months to actually document the library. Mostly because not because it's like you can easily find tools to do that like in a week or two, but mostly because you have to think through that process. Carefully to make sure you're not missing any detail. And obviously, you have to spend time presenting the work itself because the perception of a thing is basically what it is in the mind of other people. People don't care that you spend 12 months working on the library. They care that when they open the documentation and when they start going through the library, it's so easy for them to understand. And that is the key difference there. So spending time documenting. I don't joke with documentation in general. And obviously, when it's out there, spending time to actually spread the word about it, speaking at events, speaking at conferences if possible. But if you're the shy type, for sure, just stick to writing or stick to like any form of distribution that will help you spread the word about the library.
Sweet, yeah, that makes sense. We've got Timothy asking to request. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. All right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's evening yet. Good day, everyone. Sage, Laza, Esther. Yeah, you guys have spoken really well. So I just wanted to ask, like, are they like different, the different kind of contributors that contribute? Are they like design contributors, or just all of them are just devs for Chakra UI?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I think right now most of the contributions we get are largely code and docs related. When I say docs, I mean documentation and docs
All right.
related contributions. We haven't had so much design contributions, so that's just to tell you like how deep it gets. Sometimes I have to actually become a designer again to actually like move Chakra UI forward on the design side. But yeah, that's the nature of the project.
All right. So a follow up question would be like, how do you like? I don't know if you do like onboard people, maybe like if needs, or do you like publish it? Because when you land on the Tracker UI page itself, you don't even see something like, oh, this project needs more contributors or something like that. I don't know. Yeah.
It's a thing because like I mean one of my core principle is mostly like anyone that really, I mean, I could be wrong here for sure, so please don't quote me on this one, but anyone that really wants to actually contribute would actually show some interest, and actually start the process of in general. Mostly is like if you want to contribute, you can reach out on Discord, even reach out via Twitter to say I want to contribute to this project. Can you guide me? And I think that most of the core maintainers we have today are very generous enough to walk anyone through and start contributing. The thing I would say though is like if you know you're not going to like have the time to contribute, it's best to just like try to contribute on your own. Because in my mind, what I always do is if I'm going to engage with like trying to onboard a person into a project, it's always best to make sure that this person is going to get some more time. Basically, dedicate some time to help as well from time to time. I've seen examples where people show interest and basically after the onboarding they're gone, and they never show up anymore, which is
Oh,
also
wow.
open source. So it's mostly just start to show some commitment and then you can reach out.
All right, great. Thank you. That was all.
All right, cool. Anyone else wants to jump in? In the meantime, I'm going to loosen things up and I'm going to ask Sage, what do you do for fun except building open source libraries?
Yeah, good question. What I do for fun, most of the time I basically just like watch Netflix, play video games. I'm a huge anime fan. I spend time watching Naruto, or new animes that are out. Basically, that's what I spend most of my time doing. And then on weekends, I basically also go for sports every Sunday, just to like move my body and soul and mind and spirit out of like the context of like home and work. And that definitely helps a lot.
We need to do that way more often. All right, and would you mind telling us what new projects are you working on? Some secrets.
Yeah, new projects. It's kind of hard because Chakra UI and Zag are like very big enough for me right now. I wish I could make space for it. I mean, for new projects. But what I can say though is that I'm currently exploring the possibility of creating a design system framework around what we've done so far with Chakra UI. So Chakra UI is basically a very niche project. Largely for React. We have a few Vue contributors as well, helping to maintain the Vue version. But I think that we actually need to like really think about like what a design system framework could look like, so that it actually helps other people that build design systems learn the patterns and the processes that we've learned while maintaining Chakra UI.
Sweet. All right, I think I'm out of questions. Does anyone else wants to jump up? Esther, do you have any more?
No, all good on my side. I guess we can close it out now. Okay, someone is requesting, so let me
Yeah,
just.
first to ask questions. We don't bite, so regardless of.
Yeah, someone is coming up to ask a question. I think Abraham. Yeah, go for it, Abraham. You can talk now.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what sports Sage does on the weekends.
Oh, really? Most of the time it's badminton. That's it.
Okay, Abraham, you've gotten your answer. Do you have any more questions?
No, not at all.
Okay, cool. Yeah, badminton is nice. So any other person? 3, two, one. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's been an amazing conversation so far. It's been really enlightening. Sage has so much experience, and I guess, like, as he was talking, I was picking out so many nuggets that I would share later on Twitter about open source, and it's just good to see how your experience has, led you to this part. So thank you for honoring our invitation, and it's been an amazing time. Thank you, Laza, for being an awesome co-host as well. So at this point, I think, Sitch, do you have any other thing to say, Laza? Do you?
I don't have any more thing to say. I mean, excited and grateful to be here to actually share my knowledge. And yeah, to everyone out there, everyone at least helping with Chakra UI. At least, I mean, I've seen a couple of people: Esther, Lazar, Abraham, Mark. I see Mark here as well. I mean, and anyone out there that's been like helping out with Chakra UI. I mean, thank you for all the work you do. Honestly, like in the end, like there's so much things I've learned from every single person that has contributed to the project. So it's mostly me just appreciating you all for the work that you do on the project.
Cool. Thank you. So that's it for this Twitter space. Thank you so much for joining. Really, really appreciate it. And so we'll see you when we see. Take care, everyone, and have a beautiful weekend.
Take care, people. Thank you for stopping by.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye.